My hands used to bleed from pulling him out of the mud. I gave up my college fund, my sleep, my entire 20s, just to watch him marry the girl who almost ruined him. Today, I woke up 10 years in the past. This time, I'm letting him drown. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't the sterile, lavender-scented hospital room where I had spent my last waking moments, listening to the monotonous beep of a heart monitor that no one was coming to visit. Instead, it was the pungent, unmistakable stench of industrial floor wax, cheap teenage cologne, and the metallic tang of radiator heat. I blinked, my eyelashes scraping against the dry surface of my eyes. The blinding fluorescent lights above hummed with a low, persistent electrical buzz that vibrated right into the base of my skull. I was sitting at a desk. The surface was a faux wood veneer, sticky in the bottom left corner where someone had scraped off a piece of ancient gum. My hands, my 30-year-old hands that had been calloused from years of double shifts and scarred from a kitchen grease fire I started while exhausted, were smooth. The cuticles weren't bitten down to the quick. I inhaled sharply, the air catching in my throat, and looked to my right. Lucius was asleep. He was slouched over his AP government textbook, his cheek smushed against a glossy page about the legislative branch. A thin string of drool pooled near his mouth. He wore that faded gray zip-up hoodie, the one with the frayed cuffs that I would eventually mend for him over and over because he claimed we couldn't afford new clothes while he was studying for his LSATs. Looking at him didn't trigger the explosive cinematic rage I always thought I'd feel if I saw him again. There was no roaring in my ears, just a cold, heavy stone dropping into the pit of my stomach, settling in my intestines like bad meat. I remembered the last time I saw him. We were 28. We stood in the foyer of the house I had paid the down payment for, the house he was now kicking me out of. He was wearing a bespoke navy suit that I had picked up from the dry cleaners that very morning. He hadn't yelled. That was the worst part. He had just looked at me with this exhausted, pitying expression, like I was a stray dog that had overstayed its welcome. "You suffocated me, Cynthia," he had said, adjusting his watch, a Rolex his new firm had gifted him. "You didn't save me. You just managed me. You kept me from the life I was supposed to have. You kept me from her. Here. Harper." I dragged my eyes away from Lucius's sleeping face and looked toward the front of the classroom. There she was, Harper Montgomery. She sat 2 rows ahead, her blonde hair falling in a perfect, careless cascade down her back. She smelled like expensive vanilla bean and something faintly floral. She was chewing on the plastic cap of a pink gel pen, laughing silently at something the boy next to her whispered. In my first life, Harper had been a localized hurricane. She was beautiful, bored, and entirely destructive. She collected boys like charms on a bracelet, wearing them out until they lost their academic standings, their athletic scholarships, their minds. Lucius had been her target our senior year. In that life, I had seen the signs. I had intercepted the notes. I had physically dragged Lucius to the library when he wanted to ditch school to smoke behind the bleachers with her crowd. I did his homework so he wouldn't fail. I swallowed my own pride, skipped my own art portfolio deadlines, and took extra shifts at the diner to pay for his college application fees because his dad had drank his away. I built Lucius Holmes from the ground up, brick by brick, sacrificing pieces of my own foundation to do it. And 10 years later, after he passed the bar and made partner, he reconnected with Harper. They had an affair for 6 months in the very bed I bought. When I found out, he didn't apologize. He blamed me for stealing his true fate. A sudden squeak of rubber soles on the linoleum snapped me back to the present. Mr. Harrison, our history teacher, was turning his back to write on the chalkboard. The chalk tapped out a staccato rhythm that seemed to echo inside my hollow chest. October 14th. I looked down at the corner of my notebook. I had doodled the date in blue ink. The realization washed over me, chilling the sweat that was beginning to prickle at the back of my neck. October 14th was the day. It was the catalyst. It was the day Harper slipped the pale pink envelope onto Lucius's desk. The love letter. The invitation to a party at her parents' empty cabin. the party where 2 kids got arrested, and where Lucius, in my previous life, had almost gone before I intercepted the note and lied to him, saying the party was canceled. I stared at the space between my desk and Lucius's. The aisle felt like a canyon. My lungs expanded, pulling in a deep, shaky breath. I wasn't dead. I wasn't in the hospital. The universe, in some sick, twisted joke, had rewound the tape and dropped me right back at the exact moment I ruined my own life by trying to save his. I slowly uncurled my fingers. I placed my hands flat on the cool, sticky surface of my desk. The tension that had lived in my shoulders for a decade, the constant, buzzing anxiety of keeping Lucius on track, was suddenly gone. A dark, quiet amusement began to bubble up in my throat. I pressed my lips together to keep from smiling a very ugly, very bitter smile. "You want your true fate, Lucius?" I thought, watching his chest rise and fall as he slept through the education I would later pay for. "You can have it." The bell was going to ring in exactly 4 minutes. The collective energy in the room was shifting, a restless shuffling of backpacks and the clicking of 3-ring binders. Mr. Harrison wiped a streak of chalk dust from his slacks, giving up on the last 10 minutes of his lecture. "Read chapter 4 tonight. There will be a quiz. And no, Holmes, you can't sleep through it this time." A few kids chuckled. Lucius shifted, grumbling something incoherent into his textbook, but didn't lift his head. Up front, Harper stood. She stretched, a calculated arch of her back that drew the eyes of at least 4 guys in the immediate vicinity. She slung her designer tote over her shoulder and began walking down our aisle. My heart didn't race. That was the strangest part. The last time this happened, my pulse had drummed frantically against my ribs. I had been terrified of losing him. I had operated on a desperate, adrenaline-fueled instinct to protect my territory. Now, my heart beat at a slow, lazy rhythm. Harper walked past my desk. The scent of vanilla hit me, cloying and heavy. She didn't even look at me. To her, I was invisible, just the quiet, frumpy girl who orbited Lucius. As she brushed past Lucius's desk, her hand dropped seamlessly. A thick, pale pink envelope slid from her fingers and landed softly against the spine of his AP government book, right next to his face. She kept walking out the door without missing a beat. The letter. It sat there, glaringly bright against the dull gray of the desk. The paper was expensive, heavy cardstock. I could see the faint indents of her handwriting on the front, spelling out his name in loopy, exaggerated cursive, Lucius. Muscle memory is a terrifying thing. Before my conscious brain could stop it, my right hand twitched. My fingers extended, brushing the edge of the pink paper. It would be so easy. Just slide it off the desk, crumple it into the depths of my canvas backpack, and let him wake up none the wiser. I could ask him to study after school. I could buy him a cheap burger, listen to him complain about his dad, and slowly mold him back into the safe, successful man who would eventually abandon me. My fingertips rested lightly on the envelope. The texture of the paper felt rough against my skin. I looked at Lucius's face. He looked so young. The lines of stress that would later carve themselves into his forehead weren't there yet. The smug, entitled set of his jaw hadn't fully formed. For a fraction of a second, a pathetic, bruised part of my soul whispered, "Maybe this time you can fix him better. Maybe if you just love him harder." Then I remembered the smell of the rain on the asphalt the night he locked me out. I remembered the texture of the cardboard boxes I had to pack my entire life into while he watched from the leather sofa I bought. I remembered the absolute chilling void in his eyes when he told me I was a burden. My fingers curled. I didn't grab the letter. Instead, I nudged it. I pushed the pink envelope directly into the center of his desk, moving it out of the shadows of his textbook so it was bathed in the harsh fluorescent light. I positioned it perfectly, impossible to miss. Then, I pulled my hand back and wiped my fingertips on my jeans, as if the paper had left a greasy residue. The bell screamed through the classroom. Lucius jolted awake, knocking his textbook off the desk with a heavy thud. He rubbed his face. his eyes bleary and unfocused, leaving a red impression on his cheek where the book's binding had dug into his skin. He groaned, bending down to pick up the book. When he sat back up, his eyes landed immediately on the pink envelope. I watched him from my peripheral vision. I wanted to see every micro-expression. I wanted to burn it into my memory. He stared at it for a second, his brow furrowed in confusion. He glanced around the room, then looked at me. "Did you leave this?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep and irritation. "No," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It wasn't the soft, accommodating tone I usually used with him. It was flat, dead. Harper dropped it. The shift in his demeanor was instantaneous. The sleepiness vanished, replaced by an electric jolt of adrenaline. His posture straightened. The irritation melted into a look of disbelief, followed rapidly by a slow, blooming smirk of pure ego. He wiped his mouth, suddenly self-conscious of the drool, and grabbed the envelope. He tore it open with eager, clumsy fingers. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. Cabin party. Tonight. Bring booze if you can. Don't bring the watchdog. He read it twice. A flush of heat crept up his neck, coloring the skin above his collar. He looked up, his eyes darting toward the classroom door, even though Harper was already long gone. He looked hungry. He folded the letter carefully, treating it like a fragile artifact, and slid it into the front pocket of his jeans. "Hey," he said, turning to me. He was already packing his bag, his movements hurried and erratic. "I can't do the math homework with you tonight. Something came up." In my past life, this was the moment I would have pleaded. I would have asked what was wrong, offered to come over, offered to help. I would have made myself small to make him stay. I looked at him, really looked at him. The frayed jacket, the scuffed sneakers, the arrogant tilt of his chin. He wasn't a project. He wasn't a victim. He was just a selfish boy making a choice. "Okay," I said. Lucius paused, halfway zipped up his backpack. He looked at me, confused by the lack of resistance. He was used to me pushing back. He thrived on it. It made him feel valuable. "Okay," he repeated, frowning slightly. "Just, okay?" "Have fun," I said, turning my body away from him to face my own desk. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder. It was thick and heavy. Inside was the application for the Rhode Island School of Design, the application I had thrown away because the tuition was too high and Lucius needed me to stay local. "Wait, what is that?" Lucius asked, leaning over slightly to try and see what I was doing. His tone held a flicker of annoyance, displeased that my attention was no longer entirely consumed by him. "Nothing you need to worry about," I murmured. I clicked my mechanical pencil. The sharp snick of the lead advancing sounded incredibly loud in the emptying classroom. I began to fill out the top line. My name, Cynthia Anderson. "Whatever," Lucius scoffed, grabbing his bag. "I'll text you later, if I'm not busy." He walked away, his steps light and hurried, rushing off to catch up to the girl who smelled like vanilla and ruin. I didn't watch him leave. For the first time in 10 years, I looked down at my own paper. The graphite scratched against the pristine white surface, making a soft, steady sound. It was the sound of a slate being wiped clean. Let him go to the cabin. Let him get arrested. Let him fail his senior year. Let him rot. I had a portfolio to finish. The art room on Monday morning smelled like kneaded erasers, wet clay, and the sharp chemical bite of fixative spray. It was a quiet sanctuary tucked away on the 3rd floor. I sat on a wobbly wooden stool, my hands stained black with willow charcoal, pressing the brittle stick against a large sheet of rough-tooth paper. The friction sent a satisfying vibration up my wrist. In my past life, I hadn't touched charcoal since my sophomore year. Lucius hated the way the dust got on his clothes when I hugged him. Down in the main hallways, the school was buzzing like a disturbed hornet's nest. The gossip had reached a fever pitch before first period even started. The cabin party had been a disaster. Someone, probably a neighbor, annoyed by the bass vibrating their windows, had called the cops. Rumors flew thick and fast. Harper had managed to slip out a back window, ruining a pair of suede boots in the mud, but escaping cleanly. Lucius hadn't been so lucky. He had been caught holding a plastic cup of cheap keg beer, too drunk to form a coherent sentence, let alone run. In the timeline that was now dead, I had spent this exact Monday in the counseling office, crying, taking the blame for the alcohol, claiming I had snuck it into his car without his knowledge. I had earned myself a week of detention and a permanent mark on my spotless record, all to keep him eligible for the lacrosse team. Today, I just blended a shadow on my canvas with my thumb, relishing the powdery texture of the charcoal against my skin. Cynthia. The voice was raspy, scraped raw by shouting and cheap cigarettes. I didn't jump. I slowly wiped my hands on a dirty rag before turning around. Lucius stood in the doorway. He looked atrocious. His skin had a sickly, grayish pallor, and the bags under his eyes were deep, bruised purple. He smelled like sour sweat, unwashed hair, and the sickly sweet mints he always chewed to mask the stench of his bad decisions. His left cheek bore an angry red scrape, likely from being shoved against the side of a police cruiser. "Hey," I said. My voice was a calm, flat line in the quiet room. He stepped inside, kicking the door shut with his heel. The heavy wooden door slammed with a loud, hollow thud that echoed off the cinder block walls. He ran a trembling hand through his hair, pacing the short distance between the drying racks and my easel. "It's bad, Chloe," he muttered, not looking at me, speaking to the floor. "My dad went ballistic. He threw a bottle at the wall when the cops brought me home. He locked me out. I slept in my car all weekend." A phantom ache twitched in my chest. It was a reflex. 10 years of conditioning screamed at me to stand up, wrap my arms around him, smooth his messy hair, and tell him I would fix it. I could feel the ghost of that heavy, suffocating responsibility settling on my shoulders. I fought the urge to reach for my wallet, to offer him my lunch money, to offer him my bed. I bit the inside of my cheek until the metallic taste of copper flooded my mouth. The pain grounded me. "That sounds awful," I said, leaning back on my stool. I crossed my arms. Lucius stopped pacing. He finally looked at me, his eyes heavily bloodshot, narrowed in confusion. He waited a beat. He was waiting for the follow-up. He was waiting for the "here, take my keys," or the "let me call Mr. Harrison and ask for an extension on your project." When the silence stretched on, filled only by the hum of the ventilation system, his confusion morphed into frantic irritation. "That's it?" he snapped, his voice cracking. "I'm telling you I'm sleeping in a freezing Honda Civic and you just say that sounds awful? Cynthia, I have an AP Gov paper due tomorrow. I haven't even started. I need you to let me use your notes, and I need a place to crash." He stepped closer, invading my space. The smell of his desperation was suffocating. "No," I said. It was a tiny word. It slipped out of my mouth so effortlessly it almost surprised me. Lucius froze. He blinked rapidly, as if I had suddenly started speaking Russian. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no," I repeated, picking up a fresh stick of charcoal. "I'm not doing your government paper, and my mom is painting the guest room, so you can't stay over. You should probably go to the library and start researching your topic." He stared at me, his jaw slack. The arrogance that usually defined his features had completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, hollow-eyed boy. He looked at my hands, blackened with soot, and then at the canvas. "What is wrong with you lately?" he demanded, his tone turning vicious, a desperate defense mechanism. "You're acting like a total bitch. You used to care about me." "I do care, Lucius," I lied smoothly, the words falling like dead leaves. "Which is why I think you need to handle this yourself. Character building." I turned back to my drawing, pressing the charcoal into the paper. Scratch, scratch, scratch. "You're unbelievable," he spat, his voice shaking with a potent mix of rage and panic. He waited another 3 seconds, hoping I would break, hoping I would drop the charcoal and beg for his forgiveness. I didn't move. He stormed out, ripping the door open and letting it slam so hard the windows rattled. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the massive, seismic shift of a tectonic plate inside my soul. I had just watched him step onto the ledge, and for the first time, I hadn't thrown myself underneath to cushion his fall. I looked at the canvas. The drawing was messy, chaotic, and dark. It was beautiful. By November, the rot had set in. It wasn't a spectacular explosion. It was a slow, agonizing leak. Without me intercepting his missed assignments, forging his father's signature on warning letters, and physically dragging him out of bed on test days, Lucius's academic facade crumbled into chalk dust. The cold weather had stripped the trees bare, leaving the campus looking stark and unforgiving. I walked across the frozen quad, the icy wind biting at my cheeks, a heavy, thick envelope tucked safely in my bag. The Rhode Island School of Design. Early acceptance. I felt a quiet, simmering warmth in my stomach that the winter wind couldn't touch. My hands were shoved deep into the pockets of a new wool coat, a coat I bought with the money I didn't spend on Lucius's college application fees. Up ahead, near the smoking boundary line, a small crowd had gathered. I slowed my pace, my boots crunching rhythmically against the frost-heaved pavement. Harper was standing there. She was wearing a pristine white puffer jacket, her blonde hair tucked beneath a cashmere beanie. She looked immaculate. Beside her stood the starting quarterback, a guy with broad shoulders and a terrifyingly blank stare. Lucius was standing across from them. He looked smaller than I remembered. His gray hoodie was stained, the frayed cuffs now completely unraveled. He was gesturing wildly, his voice carrying over the wind. "Come on, Harp, you said you talked to your dad about giving me a job at the dealership," Lucius pleaded, shifting his weight nervously. "I got kicked off the team. If I don't get some cash flow, my dad is going to kick me out for real." Harper laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, which somehow made it worse. It was a light, dismissive, tinkling sound. "Lucius, my dad doesn't hire dropouts. And honestly, you're kind of a buzzkill lately. Stop texting me so much." "It's weird." She turned her back on him, slipping her arm through the quarterback's. They walked away, leaving Lucius standing alone in the freezing cold. He watched her go, his shoulders slumped, the absolute picture of defeat. In my first life, Harper had ruined him, and I had spent a decade trying to put him back together, only for him to crawl back to her the second he had a six-figure salary. Now, without my foundation to stand on, he wasn't even worth her time to ruin. He was just pathetic. He turned, kicking a frozen clod of dirt with his sneaker, and saw me standing 10 feet away. He froze. The wind whipped between us, carrying the smell of exhaust from the idling buses and the bitter scent of dead leaves. He walked toward me. There was no arrogance left. His eyes were hollow, sunken pits. He looked like a ghost haunting his own life. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice raw. A bitter, ugly smile twisted his lips. "Everyone's bailing. The rats are leaving the sinking ship." He stopped in front of me, looking down at his scuffed shoes. "I failed, Gov, Cynthia. I'm not graduating in the spring. I have to go to summer school." He looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed, frustrated tears. It was the look he used to give me when he wanted me to bleed for him. "I don't get it," he whispered. "You used to be right there. Every time I slipped, you always caught me. What happened to you? Why did you stop?" The air between us was heavy, charged with a decade of unlived history. I looked at his face, searching for the man who would coldly kick me out of my own home in 10 years. I couldn't find him. That man would never exist, because I refused to build him. "I realized something," I said, my voice steady, unbothered by the cold. "What?" he croaked. "I realized that I was drowning so you could float." I pulled my hands out of my pockets. My cuticles were perfect. My skin was unscarred, and I don't want to drown anymore. He stared at me, searching my face for a crack, for a hint of the desperate, accommodating girl he used to own. "You did this!" he suddenly hissed, a spark of the old, entitled fury flaring to life in his chest. He took a step closer, trying to loom over me. "You stopped helping me on purpose. You wanted me to fail." I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I just looked at him with an absolute chilling apathy. I didn't make you fail, Lucius, I said softly, stepping around him. I just put the letter back on your desk. I didn't wait to see if he understood. I didn't wait to watch the realization dawn in his eyes that I had known about Harper's invitation all along. I just kept walking. The frozen pavement crunched beneath my boots. The sky above was a pale, bruised gray, but the air in my lungs was sharp and clean. I walked past the crumbling edge of his ruined life, toward the art studio, toward Rhode Island, toward a future that belonged entirely, selfishly, to me. If you've ever poured your soul into someone who only used it to water their own grass, you know exactly how Cynthia feels. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't fighting to save a toxic relationship. It's having the cold, hard courage to just let them walk away. What do you think Cynthia should do next to secure her own future? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button if you want, part 3, and don't forget to subscribe for the rest of her revenge.